Welcome, Mr. Bhaskar Tripathi. Happy to have you with us. For the interest of our viewers, please help us. Please let them know who you are and introduce yourself.
Hi, Anuj. I'm glad to be here. My name is Bhasker Tripathi, as you've already said. So basically, I'm a very tiny cog in the larger group of people who are actually trying to understand climate change and report on it and try and tell stories and put out information which is relevant and which is able to teach people more about climate change and all of these conversations. Other than that, other than climate change, I think I also report on the intersection of how it interacts with land, society, and environment. So the intersections are also very important. So that's my primary role as a journalist. But other than that, obviously, I also work with a lot of people, a lot of civil society organizations to sort of help them with the information that I have, the information that I can access as a journalist, to be able to drive their campaigns forward or to just like inform their campaigns in any manner I can. So
Right.
yeah, you can say that I'm just like a more than journalist. You can say that I'm a climate communicator. I
Hmm.
think that suits my overall profile better.
Right. And probably also a Marvel fan. I can see with your through your hoodie.
Yeah, I'm a like
So,
I'm a very
at IndiaSpend, I believe you majorly worked with data, and data is at the core for IndiaSpend as much as I know.
correct.
How do you think data adds value to these journalism stories, and why is data not used for every story that is available out there?
Okay, so let me just say it how it is. Data is a very important part of a story,
Hmm.
but most of the time it may not be the story. So it's all data is people. Basically, it's always about people. And what data actually does in most of our stories is to give you a context that whatever you are going through or whatever is happening with you around you in your society is not an isolated incident. Uh, it's happening across is a perspective that data might provide, or it's not happening across is a perspective that data might provide, and the larger conversation about when you're trying to identify a social problem and trying to tackle it, data always helps you to see through the debris of information to reach a conclusion where it might just provide you with a solution that you're trying to find through your journalism. So it's mostly about giving clarity and context that we use data for. It does form the core of our work, but I think ground reporting, being on the field, speaking to people is also very much a priority for us as journalists at IndiaSpend.
Right. And I believe with ground reporting and data being the two pillars of IndiaSpend, sourcing and making sure that you pick up the right sources and quote the right sources is also extremely important for someone like you. Why do you think that this practice is somehow fading away in today's news media industry in India? If so, why so?
Uh, I think it's because it. So I've also worked with newspapers before becoming a digital or a multimedia journalist. I think it started with the space crunch problem in
Hmm.
newspapers, because when you're trying to provide attribution to a data point, it will take at least 2 to 3 lines for you to be able to say what's the data about, where did it come from, what was the date, where can I find it, or where can the reader find it if he she wants to find it. To provide all of this context and attribution to that data point, you'll have to write 2 lines, and you mostly only have 3 paragraphs or 4 paragraphs in a daily newspaper where you're trying to report on an issue. I think it started from there and eventually it became a practice. And I also know had conversations, and I also know a couple of journalists who only do it because to not add confusion to the theme that they're trying to, the story that they're trying to tell about. Although in my personal view, I do think that you attributing your data, you telling where did you get this data from and giving an extra link along with the full name of the report or the source of the report does not meddle with your storytelling, but to some it does. So they might just want a reader to trust them that wherever they've gotten the data from is correct and they've verified it. It works for some people, but for us at IndiaSpend, I think the core is that you can't put out any data without the attribution, without making sure that it's coming from the right sources. By right sources, I mean so you when you work with data long enough, you know the what are the most trusted sources, why are they good, or if there are any problems with them. And it's most of the time as journalists, because some data scientists later become journalists, so they have the bandwidth and the expertise to verify and data point and just like call it out if it's wrong on the methodology part. But a journal like a journalist who just commonly trying to use data to provide larger, bigger context, for them it might not be possible to verify a data. But I think in that case, the good practice that you can do is to just like put the data out, attribution out, let others use that data, interact with that data, and also put the methodology out. If you see, if you think that there is some problem in the methodology that you cannot put a finger on, it's always a good practice to put that methodology in the copy. Tell the reader that this data has been collected by so and so sources with this much of a sample size from these and these regions. And then you can also always reach out to independent experts who are data scientists, data experts, and give them the source. Let them also analyze that data for you. Seek their help. They will also be able to tell you if they will be help you. They'll be helping you to verify that data. So I think as a journalist's role has always been of a postman. Um, Put your like take a letter from somebody and deliver it to somebody else. But now we're going through a time where it can't be limited to that. You know what the famous the conversation that we keep doing that about objectivity. So objectivity does not necessarily mean that I can provide space to bullshit in my copies, right? So it's also my job to verify first and then put out the information is verified. So I think that's a role that every all of us will have to take, and we don't have to do it ourselves. We can always reach out to people, quote them in our stories, put their names out. So be true to your readers, be true to your copies, and just like write it all out. I think that's the biggest service that we can do. In terms of conversation and data's use in journalism, and in general for your credibility.
Right. So, do you think data and sources when added to a story, does it desensitize or deglamorize a particular piece?
Depends on who's reading it.
Okay.
Uh, so there is a readership for people who just want to read data.
Hmm.
They and we've always had, as journalists, we've always interacted with these kind of people. We've had these people coming to us telling us that what, we don't care about your observation, your analysis. Just give us the data, tell us the main point. We're educated enough to make sense of that. But I mean, it's for them to be able to make sense of it. But there are like other section of our readership which wants us to give them a context, because the context is always important.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, so yeah, I was watching this Netflix series where this character gives a dialogue that universal laws are for land, context is for kings. Now, by this code, they meant that you laws will tell you black and white, but if in mind, you'll probably try and look beyond it and find the context in laws. So similarly for data as well. I mean, that uh, putting that context is journalists' job, and we should always be able to provide it.
although data stories are not something which is glamorized and which is not sensationalized a lot, but that is something which is happening with a lot of stories which are put out both in newspapers and broadcast and especially on online media for that matter. Do you think that is leading to sidelining of the important issues or maybe sidelining of stories which should make headlines but are not let and not being able to?
See, that struggle I think is not limited to or specific to data journalism.
Yeah.
I think this has been a struggle for journalism in general, with regard to most of the important topics that should be spoken about but not given space, because something sensational, something political, something finds a space because it has a better readership value. So I don't think it's the data which is making a story boring and thereby leading it to not find space. I think it's general. It's in general the issue. You can write you can use the data to write a very catchy story on crime or on or just like on anything that grab anything on eye grabbing,
Mm.
and it will sell. So I think the data is not the problem. It has always been the historical problem of what people find interesting to read,
Mm.
and what exactly are they reading and what should they be reading. The distinction between this is the answer to your question. Actually, it's not, I think, about data. It's more or less about what people should read and what they're reading. It's about what TV should show and what is it showing right now.
Right. So, do you think that journalists in general hold this power where they decide what people should see, and are they utilizing this power well, or are they putting out products and content which people want to see, but is probably not what they should see?
I think a lot of filtration is happening. I think that filtration is sometimes conscious,
Mm.
and most of the times it's conditioned.
Mm.
Um at the end of the day, we are passionate about whatever we're writing about, but most of us come from very humble families, and we don't have cushions to, some days say that if the organization or if somebody or if some outlet is not letting us write about something that should be written about, we will leave our jobs.
Mm.
You know what? So at the end of the day, we all are just also trying to save our jobs. And I'm not saying that organizations are dictating what to write and what not to write, although it is also happening in some places. But I think it's mostly about the silent process in newsrooms where the things that you shouldn't be writing on are discouraged.
Mm.
And the way these stories are discouraged, and the process that goes behind this discouragement and being able to, like, it's about how silently, indirectly I can make you feel that if you write about this thing, it won't get published,
Mm.
it won't find space, and how we, without realizing, fall for it.
Mm.
We start writing things that we know that our editor will approve, in a heartbeat, and will go with our byline, rather than writing about things that should be written about and fighting for them with our editors. A vibrant newsroom is always chaotic.
Mm.
It cannot sound like, look like another corporate office where no discussion is happening and everybody is following instructions. So I think it's a very silent process how it's conditioned in your brain that this is something that you can write about, this is something that you cannot write about. You're allowed to take the liberty with your copy this much, and this is a line which needs to be drawn. And most of the time, I also think that it's like all these editors who's conditioning it in your brain are not evil.
Mm.
ऐसा नहीं है that they do not want you to write about these things. Everybody have their own experiences, and I think their experience drives their understanding, and they want you to work in cognizance with their understanding of the
Mhm.
topic. which I think shouldn't happen. Which I do think a good editor who's leading a team should always be open to the thought, to their thought process, or to their knowledge, or to their style of work be challenged from anybody. Uh, because at the end of the day, again, we all are journalists. We're not. There was a reason why we did not choose corporate jobs, and we chose journalism over anything else. There was a reason why we wanted to write about a certain topic that we're writing on today. So, and in the process, I think we all are human. We sometimes we're going through or our own things, and we sometimes lose the sight of it. That yeah. So I think it's very silent, and most of the time
Right.
unconscious.
Right. So for the next question, how do you think social media has played a role both in news media and in the traditional media? The pros, the cons. Like, what are your thoughts on social media coming in and taking over journalism or news delivery, for that matter?
Well, I can only comment what I think about what social media has done for us journalists. It has made us slaves to our own profiles. It made all of us turn ourselves into products where we're constantly trying to sell ourselves, and um, sometimes with our work, sometimes with our opinions, and then later on we find it difficult to realize that those opinions on your social media are fine, but they can't creep into your copies, which they eventually start doing, because again, we're only human. What if we have strong opinions about something, it will reach our copies, um, and that's fine. Those copies also find leadership, but ethically that's not we should have been doing. But again, as I said, it's a changing time. Like we journalism will always reflect the times we're living in. It can't happen in isolation.
Mm.
It's not a practice like law, practicing law. There are rules, but those rules are being broken by people you're reporting on. You will sometimes also have to break some rules. So all I'm trying to say that it will always be a reflection of the society you're living in, the time you're living in, your reaction, journalists' reaction to stories, and how they cover those stories. So I guess I think that the only drawback that I see is that a lot of journalists feeling this pressure of selling themselves on social media. A that B, I also think that because a lot of digital platforms want to excel on social media, they have this policy of inviting opinions from already from people who are already influential on these social media platforms, and sometimes not only like they do not only get space to write on things, but they also get jobs as
Mm.
journalists, but
Mm.
they've not put in those years of learning about the practice. Um, what can we do, what we can't do, um, and that's fine. I think anybody can become a journalist. It's not like a rocket science, but I do think that when somebody from social media space reaches the newsroom and starts writing stories on things that they were already putting out their opinions on social media, and that is why they became famous. Sort of the end product and the impact it has sort of meddles with the overall respect that journalism has. Um I mean, with its credibility, and
Right.
its credibility is in question a lot. So
And do you think that question and credibility comes in because they have not been trained as a journalist, or is it because they have some other means and motives, and that is why they're not just credible to begin with?
I mean, it's very interpersonal. No, how much, nobody can answer this question. Actually, it's very personal. I mean, you could be motivated
Yeah.
uh, to a propaganda, and I may not be, or I may be
Mm.
motivated towards a certain line of thought. So it's very individualistic. But I do feel that this constant pressure of holding a view on social media for journalists and finding a
Mhm.
space for themselves,
Mm.
and actually the process of organizations finding journalists important if they have a good reach on social media.
Yeah.
This developing, evolving ecosystem is becoming very problematic for newsrooms.
Right. And what do you think is the main problem that is coming out of this? Is it leading to destruction of the smaller media houses, or maybe is it leading to better journalists not getting the limelight? What is the main problem coming out of this?
I think it's what you said, and like much more. Like
Mm.
uh, sometimes, I mean, a good reporter always finds its voice, but sometimes it can happen that somebody would feel neglected in their own organizations because they don't have a good reach, and because
Mm.
digital organizations are also very small.
Yeah.
They're very interpersonal. They're not like huge conglomerate journalism houses where like 100 people are working on a floor and not all of them know each other.
Yeah.
So it can lead to a lot of interpersonal problems,
Right.
and and thereby taking these like reaching these problems also reach the work.
Mm.
And yeah, so I don't, I still think that I've not thought about it enough, but this is whatever I've told you is something that I see in front of me unfolding across organizations.
Right.
So uh, so yeah, that is
And
what my primary
do you think this also brings about polarization in the presentation of facts? Because I personally believe that media right now is highly polarized, and as you said, media is a reflection of the times that we live in. So, do you think this polarization is being caused because of social media, and what can be a solution to this?
I think it's because of the social media has had a like a giant role to play in polarizing the society. So, and of course, I'm not to discredit all the good that it also does to the
Yeah.
society. Uh, but yeah, talking about challenges, it has played a giant role in polarizing, and how the information is put out is again polarized. And your whatever you just said is absolutely correct, because uh, everybody is trying to reach to larger number of people and tell them their story,
Yeah.
their version of the story. So, and this fight is being like it's happening daily over Twitter. Like we always find there are these organizations that always will put out and like you will say something, and then they will put out the different version of it, and they would say that you reported it from a bias and we've just now put it out from how it is. So that kind of this thing has started happening over Twitter a lot. This did not used to happen earlier, because even if three reporters are reporting on the same story, it was always said that everybody, every reporter will might their I mean their stories might match about the in-depth details, but they're all adding something to
Yeah.
the topic at hand. But right now, this trend about uh, organizations putting out stories with a motivation to discredit another organization's stories is something very terrible. It's not helping anybody. It's only uh, taking journalism to a hole where it just might not be able to come back from. For some people, I mean, it can just like have a very drastic impact on some readers. I mean, they would just like stop trusting news altogether, and it has started happening. No,
Yes.
we know these people who say that I don't trust news anymore. Uh, yeah, and then they go on their WhatsApps and forward messages. That's a different topic for different times.
How do a smaller organization like yours look at the internet? And also, I know that you are not, but maybe you have friends who are independent journalists. How do they look at internet, and how do they look at the social media? Do they look at it as a boon, or do they look at it as a curse?
I think for all of us, we are a digital platform.
Hmm.
So for all of us, social media and this digital platform is job, is like whatever we like aspiring to achieve can only be achieved through this medium. No, so
Hmm.
that's digital. The platform forms the core of our work. How we're using it is something that can be debated upon. Not like me, like how in general the media, the people who are working on the digital platforms, journalists are using it can be debatable. Yeah, I think for everybody, it provides a brilliant opportunity to connect, to put out stories rapidly to reach a larger audience. So I think the goods are there. The the good points that you can count on about how digital platforms and social media is helping journalists are a lot. And then also, it's always the coin always has two sides. So, but I think you can't, skipping it, running from it is the problem that we're facing right now. Because if there is some problem with how some journalists or some people or some platforms are using social media, uh, they've come from our own ecosystem. Uh, they've been our colleagues, they've been our friends. These organizations, people who are running this organization have also run other organizations which were very respectable at some point. So it's always, and it's also about business. Uh, so I think selling hate on social media is also a good business because it's getting you reach, it's getting you money. Uh, so if you look at it from a So if you don't look at it from a social scientist perspective, any businessman would say that पैसा दो और मतलब मेरे को जो करना है पैसा कमाने के लिए मैं कर रहा हूँ. But the moment you put on that ethical lens that should you be doing it as journalists, as a journalism platform, that is where the distinction lies.
If all the citizens of the world started paying for journalism, would hate and propaganda in the media stop?
It will,
Okay.
it will, and my views can be debated.
Hmm.
But I do feel when the readers start paying for the journalism they want to read, they will make the media independent.
Hmm.
And I say that because I've not seen the bad sides of it so far. I've only seen the good sides. I've only seen organizations becoming independent and being able to put out brilliant journalism because readers are paying for that journalism. So yeah,
Right.
I think the answer to your question is yes, absolutely.
Right, but to this, as you said, it can be debated, and I would just quickly want to put out two counters here. One that would making journalism a paid product reduce its democracy, if I can use the word. I don't know if that's the right word, and or make it less democratic. And second, if everyone is paying for journalism, that doesn't mean that a journalist still can't put out hate or maybe create, as you said, hate. Selling hate is a good business. Maybe there comes up a new media house which the entire purpose is to sell hate, and it has a lot of subscribers, and they're selling subscribers, they're selling whatever they want in the product. So is that really solving the problem of propaganda and hate in the online space, or even
Hmm.
for that matter?
Cool. Um, so I think you might be correct that there will always be some platforms
Hmm.
uh, which will use this model to be able to keep themselves running. Uh, but these will always be spaces uh, funded by funded by audience or readers who want to read and foster that hate.
Hmm.
And for the lack of a better word, I would just say that it's just like they're very limited in number. um, the examples that I am talking about, let's say Washington Post or New York Times or um, even back here, News Laundry, a lot of platforms that are receive funding from people, and people are paying for their journalism, have time and again proven that their journalism, and the credibility that they're trying to provide, and they can provide if readers fund their organization, will always be more. The chances of, so when you say that if people are uh, buying news or funding the news they want to read, it it does not take away the democracy. It only makes it more democratic, in my view, because uh, if we're saying, so you know what, so are we saying that the society, our view of the society that we live in is correct? No. I think if we allow people to tell their reality and let them shape our understanding, I think that will be a more democratic process than what we have right now, where these conglomerates are funded by large corporates. And yeah, I mean, and
Yeah, I
like,
get your point there. Let me just
and also,
rephrase.
and also to your point that the, and you're saying, and you are also absolutely correct. I'm not saying that there, it will absolutely solve the problem and there will be like not a smidgen of hate left if people start paying for their journalism. uh, that's not the case. All I'm trying to say is, because let's just assume that people also send these like their representative to assemblies and
Hmm.
parliaments, no? So they are paying through their individual vote to sponsor somebody to send to a an organization or an institution from where they expect those people to work for them. Correct. That is the process of democracy.
Yeah,
And by like asking people to pay for the news that they want to read, so that we are not funded by a government who might have a bias, we're not funded by large corporates who might have a bias, is only making the news democratic. Who is reading news?
yeah,
We are creating this news for people. No, so if people paying for their news, it's only like making it more democratic. And democracy has its problem, but we'll deal with it when we reach there,
no, I
as we
get
deal
your
with it
point.
as we deal with it during our elections,
Yeah,
in our
I,
election
I, I
process.
agree. I think I'll have to rephrase the question where I say that uh, if everyone starts paying for journalism, does that make it elitist? Because the poor might not have the money to pay for the piece, and that leaves them with maybe poor quality journalism or no journalism at their disposal at all. Do you think that happening?
I don't think that will always be the case. I think it. I think the ecosystem will always be a combination of models.
Okay.
I don't think we can imagine a utopian journalism model where everybody, all
Hmm.
the readers are paying for the journalism. Um, like so, I think it will always be a combination of models.
Right.
If we're being realistic, but I
Okay.
do feel that whenever and wherever good journalism happens, it always reaches, it always spills through, and it reaches the larger public. Because I have spoken to a lot of people in my hometown, in my village, and they were aware of all the scam, or not like this, let's not say, let's not put about talk about a specific incident. All the investigations that happened here in Delhi by these brilliant journalists uh, reaches people. It because it you can't stop information from reaching people. You can only try and filter it, but that's the that's the strength of this medium. You can't stop it.
Right. And perfect segue into our next question, which says that the internet has removed these filters, right? There is an information overload where people are not drinking from the glass but are drinking from a water hose every day. There's so much information out there. Do you think this removal of course this removal of filter has led to an information overload? Do you think this should be regulated. There should be, because it's become really difficult to segregate the good from the bad and to properly label what we should and what we shouldn't consume. Do you think there should be some regulation at some level?
I don't think. I don't think there should be any regulation. I don't think uh, there. I don't think when you talk of journalism is society. Uh, Journalism discusses society basically, and I don't think there should be any filter between that discussion. And I don't think anybody should interfere with that discussion. Yes, it will have its bad. It's bads, but the society have always had its bads, and it has always derived its ways of dealing with it. And so that won't be uh, a good future where somebody is filtering the information that you should be seeking, or that should appear in front of you, because that is how you control. That is how you control the narrative. And I don't want anybody to be controlling the narrative. I don't want anybody to be filtering the any information that appears on my timeline. I should be able to make that distinction. I should be the judge. It should be my distinction, my right to decide whether I want to like read some information or not. I want to see some information on my timeline or not. I should always just be given the tools to stop that information if I want to. That's all I need. Nobody else should filter journalism. Nobody else should filter conversations, debates. It shouldn't be filtered. It's not a good state to be if things start getting filtered, because exactly what your question actually reflects what is happening right now.
Mm.
The problem never comes when a lot of discussion is happening in the society, in a democracy. The problem comes when you start filtering it, and one side start to appear, you know, more righteous, broader, more powerful. It's never that. It's always a balance. When you start messing with the balance, that is where things get screwed a little. So I don't think that any kind of filtration should happen.
Right.
I
So,
mean,
and
my personal view, of course, but
of course.
yeah.
And so, what do you think are a few steps that viewers should take to self-filter the content that they get and stay away from maybe fake news, propaganda, hate, or whatever is the main problem for them?
So I think it again depends on people on what they want to read. I mean, we all know people who I would like to, for example, my flatmate and I can have two different preferences. My flatmate might want to reach Op India for fact checks, and I might want to reach our own organization factchecker.in, or let's just say alt news for fact checking, right? So I can't now. I can try and ask the person to see my view, try and convince why you should go on alt news. But if the person is inclined towards reading op news, I can't question that. I will have to accept it, because obviously it's not like the platforms don't exist in isolation. No, people are reading them. People are appreciating the content that they're putting out. So, uh, choosing. So that's a funny bit. Earlier, when somebody said that we're going to fact check it, you trusted the person to fact check it, like you trusted the end result of that fact check. Nowadays, it like the things are fact checked from the political ideologies you follow.
Mm.
So that's not a good way to fact check facts. I mean, that is why we at IndiaSpend really rely on data whenever we fact check things, because that data is and because that data has certain depth, certain respect, and most of the time, even if the data is showing that any claim is incorrect, the data is also from the government. No, it's government's data. It's government's own data. So I mean, yeah, I think that's one way to do it, but I think all the other models are also like functioning and they're obviously finding audience and that is why they're existing.
Right.
So it's a very, there is no solution to this. It's a very interpersonal this thing. I mean, because I follow climate change, energy, environment, you will scroll my feed, and because social media also does that. No, it now sort of only shows you things that
Yeah.
you usually interact with. It only shows you posts from friends you usually interact with,
Yes.
thereby limiting your interaction to friends you might would have interacted at least once or twice in a year. So, and that's not a good, healthy this
Yeah.
thing for
I
me.
agree.
I came on social media to stay in touch with all the friends all the time. I didn't want Facebook to tell me that you know what ये 10 लोग हैं जिनसे तुम महीने में बात करते हो तो तुम इन 10 लोगों से ही बात करते रहो इन्हीं की लाइफ में घुसे रहो. That is why I said I don't want this filtration to happen, but it's happening because then because it's a gigantic business because our interests are tracked and we've shown ads and that is how we buy those products. That is how we buy internet as a product. uh, yeah, I mean, we can't go into that discussion, but I think it's a very interpersonal thing on what people want to see on their platforms. You can't control it. Again, I wouldn't want to control somebody who follows some different political ideology, because when you talk about democracy, when you talk about a healthy debate, it will always have all the sides. Uh, it will always have to be inclusive. Um, yeah, but there shouldn't be space for things that are, you know, your not that by virtue they're wrong.
Hmm.
There shouldn't be by in being inclusive. No one can allow should allow. Uh, no sector, no space, no business can allow should allow the things that are wrong by virtue. Like, so that is the only filter that I would want to put.
All right.
So yeah, that's mostly my answer would be. I mean, all of these questions are very, it's about what we think of things. I mean, and like people have starkly different views on all of these questions that you're asking.
For sure.
Yeah.
And that is why we chose to interview maybe 10 different people so that we get a good mix of what do people actually think about this.
Yeah.
Uh, so maybe the next question will probably be a little more general for that matter, where why, like to shorten it to as much as possible, why don't media houses have media as a beat where they start scrutinizing other scrutinizing their peers and maybe pinpointing what they did wrong, what they did right, recognizing what they did good? Why isn't media a really popular beat in media houses, among media houses?
Because I think it was a space that was left open.
Hmm.
And I think that these kind of platforms started coming like I think about a decade ago, if I'm not wrong, around 2011, 12.
Hmm.
Uh,
Probably 14
when
or so.
yeah, exactly. So when these a lot of these platforms came and they said, we will become the watchdog of the media.
Hmm.
It was a business space that was open,
Hmm.
and people grabbed it. And I think a lot of those platforms today also report on issues that matter for the society, and they're also doing larger journalism.
Hmm.
But that was a USP they sold themselves with, and there was a demand. No, we wanted so these so there were these celebrity journalists. We also wanted a piece of their life. We wanted to know how they're thinking. We wanted to peek into their lives, into their journalism, how they think, where did their information come from, um, how did they report on a certain event, how did they break certain story. So these were the stories that we wanted to read as journalists, as budding journalists, as students, journalism students, and it was a market that was open. So I think, and people just like use that space to create a product that found a good audience.
Right. And one final question, which might also, which is highest in the Maslow's theory, maybe. Uh, do you think freedom of speech and press still exists in India?
They do. They
Yeah.
do. At least to like to the basic level they do. But the moment I think it can. I mean, how I see it like this. So whoever is in power, or whoever has the power, political power, power of wealth, power of social influence, I think उनसे जितना दूर इंफॉर्मेशन है उतनी डेमोक्रेटिक है. जैसे जैसे उनके पास पहुंचती जाती है, it loses its freedom. That is how I see it.
Mm.
I see. I think that yeah, this relationship exists, and the closer you are to these places of power, different kinds, the less democratic it becomes, the
Right.
less free it becomes. And earlier this was something that was not appreciated or respected. But nowadays, proximity to power is appreciated. Proximity to power is why some people become journalists,
Mm.
because they want to gain influence. And that's okay. I mean, that's their own personal outlook. As I said, every aspect of the society will always have its different sides. And good or bad is also our personal perception of those realities. So, yeah, I think to answer it in a one line, I would just say the closer you are to power, the chances of you being less free exist.
Right. Okay. Now I would end this with a rapid fire round of sorts, where I would like you to answer in one line these three questions, or these. Yeah. One. Advice to an upcoming journalist, someone who has just started.
Be on the field.
All right.
Do not learn in newsrooms, learn on the field.
Right. Advice to a social media news consumer.
Be cautious of what you're reading.
Okay. And finally, a request to your peers and colleagues.
We should all become more inclusive. Not about, we also just should become more inclusive for information, for to each other, to all the realities of the society.
Right. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. It was a pleasure having you with us. Amazing insights. I've got 7, 8 quotes on which I'm definitely going to quote you, and I believe it will get like these quotes are going to be on some T-shirt someday. I have them from you. Like, thank you so much. Really great insights.
I'm glad that I was helpful. I was, when you reached out, I was thinking that, what, yeah, I'm sort of somebody who's always worked from behind the curtains, and I've not like really, I don't have these interactions where people ask for what I think of the society and journalism, and I'm
Yeah.
given the opportunity to talk about it. So I wasn't very confident about what I would say, and I did tell you that, I have this tendency to rumble and mumble a lot. So yeah, so I was just like trying to.
That's all right. And I
It was good.
believe
I really enjoyed the last hour. It was very good. Thank you so much.
that's like happy to have you with us. And even for future conversations, I'll be definitely open to having you around.
Please, anytime.
Right.
Always there.
Great.
Great, cool. Thank you so much.
An advice to a social media news consumer.
Limit social media.
Advice to an upcoming journalist.
Go back to the basics. Remember who you are.
And finally, a request to your colleagues or peers, both in India and there with you at Trinidad.
If I did have a little request to journalists in general, it would be that see both sides of the story, even the sides that are ugly.